Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I'm Tammy Takeishi. Today I am with Dr. David Weill. He's the former director of the Center for Advanced Lung Disease and Lung and Heart-Lung Transplant Program at Stanford University Medical Center. He's currently the principal of the Weill Consulting Group, which focuses on improving the delivery of pulmonary ICU and transplant care, and he's also an author. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Newsweek, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post, The Hill, and the Los Angeles Times. And his first novel was published in May of 2021. I'm really looking forward to digging into All That Really Matters. I've read a little bit of it, and it is a fiction medical drama, and I'm really, really excited. It's right up my alley, personally, for what I love in terms of books. But before we dig into that, I would love to know how you got your start in the medical field and what inspired you to pivot to your passion of writing a fiction book.
Tammy, thanks for having me on. I'll answer your question pretty simply. I grew up in a medical family. So my father was a physician, my mom was a nurse, and I actually started working in hospitals when I was 15 years old. And feel very comfortable in a hospital, but also, walked around looking at what was going on in these, intense moments in hospitals where life and death was in the balance. And it gave me plenty to write about. And so when I became a doctor, and as the years went on, I took a lot of notes because I was seeing stuff that I just couldn't frankly believe. I was seeing people at their best and at their worst. I saw great bravery and courageousness and wanted to write those stories down. So in 2021, I published a memoir called Exhale about my life as a transplant doctor running Stanford's transplant program. And most of it was about the emotional ups and downs of it. But I wanted to write this novel that's coming out June 11th because I wanted to go further than I could with the memoir. I think fiction allows us to wander around a little bit and explore themes in quite a bit of detail without having to stick just to the facts or be worried about offending somebody. So that's been my writing journey.
That's fantastic. What is one of your favorite parts about the writing journey?
Writing, and I'm certainly not original in saying this, I do think it helps one figure out what they're thinking. And it also allows an individual to really explore themes that they're interested in. For instance, in this novel, All That Really Matters, I was very interested in the themes of expectations. What expectations do we put on ourselves, and what kinds of expectations do others put on us, and how does that impact how we live every day? So I think one of the benefits of being able to write a novel is to explore these themes, whether it's love, and there's a love story in this novel, and there's sacrifice, and there's loss, and there's redemption. I think it allows us to explore the themes that are really on our mind in our actual real life.
Since you drew from some of your own experiences in work, did you find it easier to actually get the words on the page, or did you find any challenges or roadblocks when it comes to creating your story?
One great thing about working in a hospital environment, especially on a big transplant team, is that I saw all different kinds of personalities and ran into a lot of different, very interesting kinds of people. A transplant attracts a certain type of person, usually people that are kind of adrenaline junkies and that, want to be on the cutting edge of medicine. And so when I sat down to write my novel and I developed my characters, I didn't have to go very far. I could see them in the hospital, and the characters that I created are combinations of the people that I saw in the hospital.
Are you allowed to say a favorite character, or do you like to keep that secret?
Well, I do have my favorites. I actually like all of my characters. The protagonist is Dr. Joe Bosco, who's a transplant surgeon, and I tell his story in first person, so it's in his voice. And Joe's got some rough edges to him, but he's also got a lot of redeeming qualities. But there are other characters in the book. His girlfriend, Kate, his head nurse, Mary, his father, Peter Bosco, his mother. All of these characters I came to like quite a bit because I think they really all had redeeming characters.
I would love to dig into your creative process. And I'm wondering, what was that like for you to sit down and even though you were drawing from experiences, what was one of your favorite parts about the creative writing process? And then can you relate that to your medical life? You know, the creativity in what you did as a doctor.
I really can, Tammy. I think that creating a novel or creating any book for that matter is a lot of problem solving. I think you have to get from point A to point B, and you have to do that in medicine too with complicated patients. You have to problem solve their situation. And in developing a story, you're constantly saying, well, that part doesn't go there, it actually goes over here, and you're looking for weaknesses or holes in the story or things that could be improved upon. These are exactly the kind of things I did when I was practicing medicine in the transplant arena. So I do find similarities.
Writing novels is very exciting, but also being in the medical field is very exciting. But what are some differences that you encountered when you pivoted to writing novels?
I think the biggest difference is how solitary an endeavor writing is. I worked on a team of 55 people when I was at Stanford, so I was used to a lot of people around. You show up at a hospital, a big hospital like Stanford, there's 17,000 people that work there, literally. And so you're like in this little city every day, this little community. And when you write, you're actually mostly sitting in an office by yourself, trying to put words on a page. And it took me some time to get used to the solitary experience of it, but I think I've gotten the hang of it now.
Are you one of those writers that likes to put on music when you write and things like that?
I do, very much so. And I actually put this in the acknowledgement section of my book because I listen to jazz. I'm from New Orleans, and so jazz is in our blood. And my musical taste really goes to the entirety of what jazz has to offer. And there's a friend of mine, Terrence Blanchard, who's a jazz musician from New Orleans, who I listen to nearly exclusively while I'm writing.
Nice. I love jazz music. I'll have to check that artist out.
You should.
And speaking of things that inspire you, what are some books that you've read in the past, either this year or in the past year, that have really inspired you, whether it's in your personal life or in your novel life or your medical life?
Yeah, I'm doing quite a bit of research right now, actually, for my third book, and I'm quite inspired by some of the work I'm doing more in the nonfiction arena at this point about emotional inheritance. I don't know if you're familiar or your listeners are with that term, but there's actually a phenomenon where you actually inherit from your parents and even your grandparents some of the emotional ups and downs that they may have experienced. And I'm reading quite a bit in that genre right now. It's fascinating to me that some sort of trauma that your parents or grandparents could have undergone can actually be passed down to you. So I'm pretty deeply diving into that area right now, and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'd love to piggyback on that. I know a little bit about it from the music therapy realm and,
Right.
generational trauma and things of that nature. And it is really a very fascinating topic for sure.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I've actually read some about music therapy as well, so I can understand your interest in it.
Speaking of interest, you mentioned jazz, you mentioned New Orleans. Do you play music yourself?
I don't. I really don't. I never have. And I've really actually, as much as I'm interested in jazz, I've really never even tried. I did other things when I was a kid. I played a lot of sports and really never picked up any musical instrument, but I really enjoy the listening part of it, and also the studying part of it. Just the history of jazz fascinates me as well because I think it's such a rich genre.
Yeah. If someone was to visit New Orleans, do you have any hot spots or specific places do you think someone should go to?
Yeah, I think everybody should go down in the French Quarter to Preservation Hall. It's a classic. It's been there for eons, really, and it has classic New Orleans jazz. But there's also a place called Snug Harbor that has a lot of great music in uh, just outside of the French Quarter on a street called Frenchman Street. And Frenchman Street probably has, I don't know, 7 or 8 jazz clubs all lined up. And so you can't go wrong if you just wander down that street.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah, it's on my bucket list of places to visit. I've
Yeah.
passed through there on road trips, but never actually had a chance to stop in and see.
Yeah, there's a lot here. It's the culture of this city that's attracted it to me. I moved back from California after my time at Stanford, and I've really enjoyed it. It's very rich culturally with not only music but great food, architecture. There's a lot of writers that are from here actually, and so it's an inspiring place, creativity from a creative standpoint.
We're going to pivot back again to your career. What is one of the things that you're most proud of from your medical career, and one of the things you're most proud of from your writing career?
I think from a medical standpoint, it was building programs that could deliver complex care. A transplant is a team sport, and it's a very complex delivery of care. And I think one thing that I'm most proud of is being able to put together a team of people that could all pull in the same direction on behalf of a group of patients that needed our help. So I think that by far is the most important accomplishment of my professional life. I think from a writing standpoint, I think that the first book I wrote called Exhale really spoke, I think, to the workforce out there that's going at it too hard and too long and is suffering burnout and things of that nature. And it was very gratifying to hear from folks, whether they were in medicine or law or a podcast host or trading on Wall Street, that people want to be heard about the difficulties that they're having in their career. And I was very transparent about saying that, from an emotional standpoint, my job was tough. I, watched some people live and some people die, and I felt responsible for all of them. And I wanted to get that down on a page. So I think from a writing standpoint, my first book was something I'm very proud of, and hopefully the second book will be well received as well also.
In the book, Joe's father is portrayed as a survivor of the Holocaust. What made you decide to put that in the story, and what is the importance of that to what you're doing?
It touches back on what we talked about earlier. My third book is going to go more deeply into issues of identity, and especially religious identity. And it's pretty well known that children of Holocaust survivors behave in a certain way. They seem to be very accomplishment driven. They're always trying to prove themselves. They want gratitude. And I wanted to make my main character, Dr. Joe Bosco, have all of those traits, and I wanted to make it clear where those came from. And those came from the expectations that his father, who was a Holocaust survivor, put on him. And I wanted to show that interaction. And so I thought it would be best if Joe's dad was a Holocaust survivor and Joe inherited some of those traumatic emotional experiences.
I think that makes for such not only a deep story, but allows people to have open conversations about trauma and about healing and mental health. So I really think that's fantastic that you put that in there, because it's things that people deal with on a regular basis, maybe just not out loud. If you've been feeling burned out, stressed, overwhelmed, or exhausted, the resources and courses at the Self Care Institute are here to support you. The Self Care Institute was founded by Dr. Ami Kunimura and provides support for individuals and organizations with burnout prevention, burnout recovery, and stress management. I've personally taken a few of these courses and found them to be super helpful, both professionally and personally. The care you give yourself matters just as much as the care you give to others. But if self-care is difficult for you, you're not alone. And the Self-Care Institute is here to support your well-being, resilience, and sense of fulfillment at work and at home. For more information, visit selfcareinstitute.com or go to the show notes and click on the link.
I think that that's right. And I think that the more we talk about it and shine a light on it and make it okay to talk about, I think the better off we'll all be.
As much as you can talk about your third book, will it be in any way related to your first or second book?
I think tangentially, I think that what I'm interested in now, as I write this third book, is when we look in the mirror each morning, what do we see? And I think identity is something that's on my mind right now because I personally have identified in certain ways during the course of my life. I was a transplant doctor, and when I looked in the mirror, that's what I saw. But there's other ways outside of our profession that we can identify. We can identify as a parent, as a spouse, as part of a certain religion. And I want to get into all of those issues because that's really what's on my mind right now. And as I research it, I think that it's particularly important in the times we live in because it seems like, especially in America, we're getting more and more tribal as time goes on. And I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing for our society. I think that we have to identify through a broad range of different things rather than just as one thing.
Mhm. That's a very good point that you make there. And especially, I notice as people go through their careers and go through their lives, I think they sort of, and I mean, I'm just sort of speaking from my own experience, maybe they latch on to certain identities stronger in one time period than another. Like when I was in grad school, I was like, I'm a grad student and just very proud of that and entrenched in that, and then when I got into the professional field, like I dug deeply into being a music therapist, but there's so much more to me than just that. But I think it's really interesting how as we go through phases of our life, it's almost like they're anchors. Certain identities act as little anchors for us or ports, and then we shoot off from those ports and explore other identities and hobbies and things of that nature, careers, whatnot.
I think that's right. I think that your point is spot on because our identity can be an area of safety for us. And if you see yourself in a certain way and you can sort of check that box, yes, that's who I am, it feels comforting in a lot of different ways. So I'm certainly not going to say that identity is a bad thing. It's a good thing. We just probably have to identify ourselves as more than one thing. I think that that's probably the best thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Agree, yeah. So you talked about something that you're curious about, of course, the emotional inheritance, but what are some other things that you find yourself gravitating towards research-wise?
I think from a research standpoint, I'm interested in, and I'm actually writing a piece that we're hoping to place very soon about the patriarchy in medicine, for instance. I think that there is a real issue going on within healthcare about the disparity between female physicians, especially and male physicians. And there's a lot of good information out there that I'm trying to collate and put into an article that I'm studying right now, because I do think it impacts not only the women that are practicing medicine, but the patients as well. And there's a lot of good information that, as more and more women go to medical school and become doctors, this issue is going to be more and more important because our female physicians are not rising up into leadership roles at the same rate that the male physicians are. They're paid less, for instance, and all kind of disparities that I think are really hurting healthcare. And from a broader sense, I write articles for various publications. I think you mentioned some at the outset, where I'm trying to point out things in healthcare that just simply aren't working, and so and try to provide some solutions to those problems. But the one I'm studying right now is the experience of women physicians in healthcare.
I know and love lots of women in the medical field, and family members, friends, people I admire so much. So I really appreciate that you shed light onto that disparity, and hopefully we can have some more equality in the future. So.
I hope so. I hope so. I think it's time. It's past time.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Speaking of barriers, I mean, you've obviously had a lot of success in your life across the board, but would you feel comfortable talking about a time that was difficult for you that you had to overcome?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I actually grew up in New Orleans, and there's a lot of distractions here, and so I was not a great student in K through 12. I did not have a wide variety of choices about where to go to college and things like that. Most physicians actually do. They've been academic superstars throughout their entire lives. That was not the case with me. I got my academic act together, if you will, in college. I was a pretty, I wasn't, I was a bad student. I was about to say I was an average student. I was actually a bad student in high school. I just did other things. I played sports. I like to go hear jazz music in bars in New Orleans. And I think that in that way, I've always felt like academically I started out a little bit behind. But hopefully, I've made up some for lost time, and I've worked hard to try to overcome that. But I think my parents were a little concerned.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you've made up for lost time, though, for sure. I would love to touch on the fact that you said you went to go see a lot of jazz musicians. Are there any in particular that really are memorable for you?
The one great thing about growing up in New Orleans is we had a lot of now quite famous jazz musicians that were here, right here in town. I mean, we had Wynton and Branford Marsalis that grew up in, right here. We had Terrence Blanchard. We had Harry Connick Jr. We had the Neville brothers, who aren't classically jazz, but certainly play a kind of New Orleans funk. Dr. John, people like that. The list could go on and on. We had a lot of options when it came to listening to music. And so one thing that we did as high school kids is, yeah, we would go to to bars. And back then, especially, the bars were very willing to have us. But we would also listen to music at the same time. So music was very much a part of my childhood. It's still a part of my life now.
You talked about how you listen to music when you write. Did you ever listen to music when you did surgery?
Yeah, on and off. It was so in that setting, in the hospital setting. There's so much other stuff going on that the music really became sort of elevator music in those settings.
Mm.
When I write, the one nice thing about writing, I think, is when I do listen to music, I can really actually feel the music and the emotion of it, because it's just me sitting in my office listening while I write. And I think it actually helps me write. I'm convinced of it. I don't, I think I've actually tried writing without anything on, and I don't think I do very well in that setting. I think I need to hear the music while I'm writing in order to get the best words on the page that I can produce.
Yeah, yeah. I'm the same way when I write, whether it's something fiction or, like sometimes queuing up an email, I'll just put on music because absolute silence is just really hard for me.
I think so, and I haven't asked a lot of very accomplished writers if they listen to anything while they're writing. I'd be curious to ask a few people that I know if they listen. I suppose writing in silence might be a good thing too. I don't know. It's I can't do it, but it might work for some people.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like that. It's really hard to write in silence, for sure. So this is just going to be a quirky question. If you could have dinner with any creative person, dead or alive, who would it be, and what would you have for the meal?
Interesting. I think from a creative standpoint, I've always been interested in classical musicians, their intellect, their devotion to their craft, their quirkiness also. I think that Beethoven would be somebody that I would like to sit down with and share a meal. And I think that I would definitely have a big steak with him. He seems like a steak eater to me. My father was a real classical music fan. He actually had it on all the time when we were growing up. And I got used to listening to a lot of Beethoven, so I think I would sit down with him.
Excellent. Yeah, I do love Beethoven. Yeah.
Yep, yep. It's music. It's been around for so long. I mean, can you imagine? It's hard to imagine some of the music that you hear, contemporary music, lasting as long as some of the classical musicians' music lasted. But his music's certainly been around a long time.
Yeah, yeah. You probably have if your dad's a huge fan, but Beethoven's Triple Concerto?
Yep, yep,
Oh, that's that's just it's a beyond words.
yep. Beautiful stuff.
My personal favorite is Mozart, but
Mm,
Beethoven is a very close second to Mozart,
yep. Can't go wrong either way.
right? You're definitely not gonna lose listening to either of them.
Nope, nope.
I was wondering, what is something you wish you'd known when you first started, both in your medical career as well as in your writing career?
That you didn't have to go at it hard 100% of the time. That was a lesson that took me a long time to learn. I think, in the hospital setting, you're certainly very incentivized to work very hard, and I did. But I think that we all can slow it down quite a bit and still achieve what we want to achieve and probably stay in balance a little bit better. I think there were times in my medical career where the balance between my personal, professional, and professional life was a bit out of whack. And so I tell students, medical students now, and people that are considering a career in medicine, that they really need to get that part right from the beginning. I think it's key.
Understandable. Yeah, having a work-life balance is, kind of looks different for every person, and it's almost like you have to feel it out and really discover like, okay, how much can you handle? What works well for you.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because even something as, like compassion fatigue and burnout, it's something that's so pervasive, not just in the medical field, but I think across so many fields. I mean, even in the creative world, people can burn out from doing something every day and just remembering to like take a step back. For example, like in the music therapy world, we always encourage people to make music for themselves because we're always providing and giving and making music for others.
I think that that's right. Yeah, I do. I just think that there always seems like there's so much that I want to do that sometimes I forget I forget to live in the present. That's a weakness of mine for sure.
I feel like it's always a journey, especially as we go along in our lives and find a new work-life balance. Like when someone retires and suddenly they have a bunch of time on their hands, it's like, what are you gonna do?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Like for example, my dad, he like went right back to work a few months after retiring because he was bored.
Yep, I've seen that a lot. I've seen that a lot among physicians too.
Well, before we go, is there anything else you would like the audience to know about you or your upcoming book, All That Really Matters?
Like every author, I hope that people will read it and enjoy it. I really do. It's one of those things where I love a great book and I particularly love a great story. And so if folks want to get into this world a little bit, the world I lived in, I'd encourage them to pick up All That Really Matters, my novel, and I really do hope they enjoy it. Is something that I worked very hard at, and I definitely want to see people read it and love it.
Yeah, and like I said, I love stories that blend the medical and I think I can definitely tell that you've worked hard at it and you've got such a passion for everything that you do. One final question. In your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
I think it's staying connected to that part of your brain. In other words, I think it means that you have to sit with it. In other words, you have to sit and let the creativity come to you. And, in a world where we're distracted by so many things, I think that's getting harder and harder. So, what I like to do when I'm trying to be creative is get a blank sheet of paper, old fashioned style, get a pen, and start scribbling. And I try to do that without screens and without phone interruptions and God knows what else we have in today's society, and just me and the blank page. And so when I'm really trying to be the most creative before I start putting everything into a Word document computer, I try to sit with a blank page and really let those ideas come without a screen to get in the way. I think that's important to me. I hope that helps other people.
And that's such a great idea too, just getting back to the basics, like the physical pen and paper and the act of writing, getting it really into your brain that way. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I've actually seen a lot of studies on that particular process where there's something about holding a pen, putting writing it down rather than typing it that lends itself to a more creative process. So that's how it's been for me. I really enjoy that part of it.
Excellent. Well, Dr. David Weil, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure, Tammy. Thank you for having me and for the conversation. I enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Listeners, please check the show notes for links to purchase David Weil's book, All That Really Matters. It comes out Tuesday, June 11th, so be sure to check it out. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.